Government, unlike the private sector, government is not in the business of making widgets for profit. Government is in the business, to some extent, enforcing rules and regulations, but all of that is part of being of service to people in the community. If we can help shift the culture of government and the way the public servants at every level think about, lean into conflict, and get some sense of the understanding-based model, where we first are listening rather than speaking. We're trying to understand another's perspective. And then with understanding and share our own, the parties themselves will typically find the pathway in which they're free to move. That's the culture change we're hoping to bring about.
And we find that when we work with leaders in that way, leaders that then pick themselves up and find a kind of alignment between who they are and the values that they hold, and then the actions that come as a result. And so I would say there's nothing bigger than creating that simple space of listening and supporting.
The Center for Understanding and Conflict welcomes you to The Other Chair, a monthly podcast exploring the dynamics of conflict and how to bring the human issues to the table. Together with our guests, we explore how the power of understanding each other can lead to better solutions for people on both sides of an issue. We will also share tips for managing your own mediation practice, approaching conflict in the professional world, and ways to apply our understanding-based model in your personal life. Hello to our listeners, and welcome to The Other Chair. My name is James Dyckman. Today's guests are Judge Raymond Kramer and Sethu Nair from the Center for Creative Conflict Resolution at the Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings, otherwise known as OATH, in New York City. Judge Kramer is a respected leader in conflict resolution and has played a key role in shaping CCCR's impactful programs. Sethu brings extensive expertise in mediation and restorative practices with a focus on empowering participants to address conflicts constructively. Together with a team of passionate and dedicated practitioners, they work to bring initiatives like workplace mediation, restorative practices, and dispute systems designed to transform conflict into opportunities for improved relationships and stronger communities. Hello, Judge Kramer and Sethu, and welcome to The Other Chair.
Hi, James. Thank you for having us. It's a pleasure.
Hi, James. So excited to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you both for being here, for coming in early from New York to talk about the work that you're doing. And let's begin by just getting a good overview of CCCR's mission and what sort of impact you're working to have in the community in New York City.
Yeah, thanks, James. I'm happy to share a little bit about the center, who we are, and how we came to be. The center was an initiative actually launched within a larger umbrella agency in which we exist, this, as you mentioned, the New York City Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings. And that larger agency, OATH, is the city's central administrative law tribunal that hears virtually all administrative hearings for the city of New York. And the origin of the center really begins with my role and colleagues' roles as administrative law judges hearing employee disciplinary proceedings for the city's workforce. And one of the types of cases OATH has always heard are these employee disciplinary proceedings because they're civil service positions, public service that work for New York City have a constitutional right to a full due process hearing before they can be sanctioned for misconduct. And I and colleagues presided over trials, which, with the formal end of the conflict resolution spectrum, making decisions about whether or not an employee violated the code of conduct or what the consequence should be. And I also was involved in many settlement conferences and helping parties settle those proceedings. And what myself and colleagues learned in that process, what we saw was that as you peel back the layers of the onion, as you try to understand why an employee had been charged with misconduct to get some sense of the context, you learn more often than not there was some interpersonal conflict between employee and a coworker or employee and a subordinate that was not managed at all or not managed well. And it escalated and it ended up in a formal trial process before OATH. So the idea was, can we create options when employees get stuck in conflict in the workplace and before it escalates and there's a default to formal processes like discipline or for the employee, filing a grievance or going to the Equal Employment Opportunity Office feeling that the conflict stems from the fact they're in a protected category. So we launched in 2016. Idea is get in early and help employees resolve their own conflicts, save time, energy, resources. And the response was so great after we launched, and the need was so clear for us that we quickly, had a full workload and we're busy. And fast forward to 2021, then Mayor de Blasio saw value in our work. And our work included mostly helping employees with workplace conflict, but also getting agencies to think about how processes like mediation could be used in their public-facing work. So during the pandemic, we were able to create a program called MEND. It's on our website. It's an acronym for Mediating Establishment and Neighbor Disputes. And it's a program that continues to offer free mediation as an option for community residents who are experiencing quality of life issues with neighboring bars, owners, and restaurants. So we launched that during the pandemic. Mayor de Blasio saw value in the work we did, and in 2021 issued Executive Order 63, which named the center as the city government's central resource for conflict resolution, restorative practices, required every city agency to name an alternative dispute resolution coordinator to link with us for services. We can talk some more about the programs and the work we do. The overall mission, as we see it, is to help city employees at every level, leadership to entry level, to think about conflict more positively, to learn skills and engage conflict in a more positive way, to have agency over their own conflicts. And hopefully that translates to how public servants then engage with members of the community in their work in that same way.
Some of the work that we do specifically is the services that we provide are mediation, conflict coaching, training. We help agencies think through how to build internal programs, conflict resolution or conflict responsive programs using dispute systems design. And so these are the ways that we bring in ADR, and we often use restorative circles to either resolve conflict in circles or to help people think through how to build culture within an agency. And then more recently, in the last few years, I would say that we've been advising agencies and mayoral offices on how to use the principles and practices of ADR and restorative practices to apply in their public-facing work. And we can talk more about that a little later.
And just to give our listeners a better overview, it sounds like you're working with agencies, individuals, employees, government leaders at multiple levels. So could you kind of give an overview of the communities you serve overall, and maybe a little bit of insight on what it's been like to try to build trust and foster collaboration in what I would imagine is a highly bureaucratic environment within the city of New York?
I would say the communities that we serve, largely it ends up being the city government workforce, which includes all city mayoral offices and city government agencies, anything from Parks Department, NYPD, to the Department of Corrections, and all the issue offices that mayor offices have. So the internal workplace community is one. I would also say that we have an indirect impact on the external community, New York City itself, through this public-facing work that we end up partnering on through agency leadership. So MEND is a really great example of the way that we reach the public through a program. So like Ray mentioned earlier, MEND is a mediation program designed to support residents and establishment owners to respond to conflicts that they come across, quality of life issues. So that's an example of how we reach the public through an ADR practice. We have other initiatives. We work with the Parks Department pretty extensively to bring restorative circles to community gardens, for example. We've helped the Department of Consumer and Workers Protection to build mediation options to support domestic workers. And so we do end up having these indirect but strongly partnered relationships that impact the New York City public community.
Conflict manifests itself in many ways in our personal lives. for professionals in the workplace and for practitioners who have made a career bringing together parties in conflict through mediation practice. Each month, the Center for Understanding in Conflict hosts live webinars with featured guests discussing best practices and sharing their experiences for tackling conflict using the understanding-based model. Judge Kramer, how common is this comprehensive approach to conflict resolution in major cities across the U.S.? Is CCR's approach a model for tackling this topic with compassion nationwide?
Yeah, thanks, James. I think it is. And to my knowledge, there is not a center devoted to conflict resolution specifically that exists in a municipal government and maybe even at other, state and federal levels. So I think it's innovative. We get a lot of interest in our program and what we do. And that interest is national. Folks find us through the website or hear about us and check in. They have some interest in replicating what we're doing, working currently with a small municipal government in another state that has an interest in building an internal conflict resolution program for its employees. We've, been contacted by groups internationally and visited by mediators and conflict resolvers from Brazil and Czech Republic and Austria. I met with some judges who are interested in building mediation and ADR programs in the court systems and in other countries. But I think what we're doing is really innovative. And just to share a little bit more what Sethu is sharing, the scope of what we're doing. The city's workforce spans some 70 agencies and offices. The majority of them are mayoral, meaning under the control of the mayor. But there are also non-mayoral agencies with elected officials, and all of their employees are city employees as well, and we serve them as well. So the city council members, the various borough presidents, community boards. The workforce itself is about 365,000 people, and it's New York City. So it's a very diverse workplace. It's heavily unionized, about 95% unionized. And the unions, we could talk more about this, are a key stakeholder in the program, but we've been able to form really good relationships with them. So the scope of what we're doing, offering conflict resolution services across city government, I think is innovative, and I don't think it exists in quite the way we exist currently. And I wanted to add a little bit to what Sethu was sharing about what we do. We named ourselves the Center for Creative Conflict Resolution. Creative really meaning that there's not a one-size-fits-all. We emphasize mediation in some ways because that's a more common process to help usually two, sometimes more in conflict. But we really need and context-centered in our services. Like what are the conflict needs? And that's led us, as we've evolved, to offer a range of services. And I think Sethu mentioned about mediation, conflict coaching. The workplace is about relationships. When two people in the workplace are in conflict, usually the work unit is somehow impacted. They're involved, they're feeling it. People know when people are stuck in conflict, and it can impact morale and productivity. So we do work with groups using, as Sethu mentioned, restorative approaches, restorative circle practice. We do a lot of training and workshops on conflict resolution skills, mediator skills, conflict management in the workplace for supervisors. Often folks get promoted for their substantive experience, but without any training or focus on managing other people, including managing conflict. Do a lot of work, they do in particular, with leaders and leadership coaching, and helping them think through change management and navigating conflict that typically comes with change to kind of steer it in a good direction. And as Sethu mentioned, we do dispute system design. We are looking where agencies want, and there have been several, where they want, support around thinking about how to design and implement their own workplace conflict resolution program, typically linked to us for services, or looking at their public-facing work. How do we use ADR? How do we use mediation? How do we use restorative approaches in the way we are currently engaging?
Sethu, can you start the discussion on what sort of methodologies and frameworks does CCCR use, especially when you look at how diverse the communities are in New York and how many, you've got workplace mediation, but neighborhood mediation. What are the philosophies that guide your conflict resolution work?
That's a really great question, James, because one of the core methodologies we use is CUC's understanding-based model. Many years ago when we started training and looping. We initially did mediation and training. And during those training offerings, we found ourselves really leveraging the understanding-based model to help people think through what happens in a workplace, what happens when you think about conflict in the workplace as a community, relationship orientation, understanding, and really going down that outer and inner V as practitioners and as leaders in government to be able to facilitate difficult conversation in a really relationship oriented way. So the understanding based model really serves and cuts across all of the work we do, whether it's training or how we do mediation, even how we do conflict coaching, I would say. Another framework we use and rely on extensively is the restorative practices framework. So there's a natural connection because whatever we do really is, the foundational idea is that we all exist in a web of relationships, and those relationships allow us to do our work well or can hinder and hamper how well we do our work. And so the restorative practices orientation really helps us to build cohesive communities in workplaces, using circles, helps us to resolve conflicts in a way that thinks about what people really need, who's directly impacted by a problem or a conflict, and how those people who are directly impacted by the problem or conflict end up having a real say in the solutions that they have. And so these two frameworks, I would say, are like strongly guiding our work. And, to step back away from the frameworks, I would say it's a spectrum of practice in a way. We have various models that inform our work, but it's really about how we use our various services and how creatively we use our various services. And so, for an example, quickly, we might have a strategic consultation with a city government leader. And in that conversation, we might identify some needs for mediation in a team. We could also identify needs for conflict coaching or even leadership coaching for others or that very leader that we're having conversation with. We might identify group conflict resolution needs. So whatever we end up identifying through our strategic consultation and the assessments we do, we then take that and then think, step back a little and think like, what does this system need? Both to resolve the conflicts that are at hand and also to help make it more proactive and a more responsive system overall.
Throughout the year, the Center for Understanding in Conflict hosts in-depth basic and advanced certificate programs designed to train you to become effective mediators and conflict resolution professionals centered in the understanding-based model. Our training programs have been the gold standard in alternative dispute resolution for 40 years and is popular within the legal community with human resource professionals, ombudsmen, and corporate workplace mediation clients. Are those two frameworks along this spectrum that you reference operating at all times simultaneously, or are there situations where one is more prominent than the other due to the community that you're working with? What is the interplay like between those?
Yeah, I would say there is a seamless quality just because we've been practicing both over time and really leveraging the wisdom of both of the methodologies to really respond to the need. So we're less focused on which process is the right tool and more focused on what is the need at hand. So naturally, over time, the methodologies have sort of woven together. But of course, there are times when we are explicitly doing mediation. And for example, we might weave in some relational question in a mediation that has a restorative feel to it, especially in the context of a relationship that needs significant improvement. But then there are times when we're literally only doing circles as a way of building community and cohesion. So in practice, we do stick to the integrity of each process, but ultimately I would say it's the frameworks and the methodology serve as a philosophical underpinnings or our general guiding orientation to the work that we do.
And Sethu, in your work, especially within these large, complex systems, have you found any unique challenges implementing these approaches in such a complex situation?
Yeah, absolutely. The city government system is quite bureaucratic. They're large, we're really big, very intensely bureaucratic. And so we have this unique challenge of, as neutrals and as relationship oriented neutrals, we have this unique challenge making sure we get buy-in from all kinds of leaders in city government. So that includes union leaders or union members. It includes management, senior leaders in city agencies and offices. It also includes the actual workforce. So we work with the various stakeholders that are part of city government and make city government run, like I said, unions, management leaders, workplace managers, staff itself, community organized people. So we work with these various groups and we have to make sure to keep getting buy-in. And that is a challenge. And I would say that's also what makes the work really fun and exciting, because to be a neutral, we really test what it means to be a neutral in this sense, so that we can be perceived as a real option for conflict resolution in city government. The other challenge I would say is that we are not the private sector. And this is something that Ray says often. Unlike the private sector, government doesn't make anything. It doesn't have a product.
Government, unlike the private sector, government is not in the business of making widgets for profit. Government is in the business, to some extent, enforcing rules and regulations, but all of that is part of being of service to people in the community. If we can help shift the culture of government and the way the public servants at every level think about, lean into conflict, and get some sense of the understanding-based model, where we first are listening rather than speaking. We're trying to understand another's perspective. And then with understanding and share our own, the parties themselves will typically find the pathway in which they're free to move. That's the culture change we're hoping to bring about. But the challenge is that default to rights-based thinking. I have to document. I have to write people up to make a record. That kind of thinking that's long existed. Government is a rights-based workplace, meaning there are all these formal processes to resolve conflict, and they're appropriate. Formal discipline, grievance for a heavily unionized workforce, those grievance proceedings. A lot of conflict will find its way to an agency equal employment opportunity office, because people in conflict look for reasons they're in conflict sometimes, and they think it must be because I'm in a protected category. And I served as the oath EEO officer for 6 years, and I had a lot of people come to me in confidence to talk about conflict, and often not naming discrimination at all, but needed some place to go to talk about a workplace conflict. So in this formal rights-based workplace that's existed for years, the center has tried to carve out a space, and there is a big space for us and a real need. But one of the challenges is that folks are used to this rights-based way of resolving conflict. They're used to kind of the more adversarial labor management relationship. So there's a default, to those more formal processes. So the challenge is just, Sethu was sharing, continuing to get buy-in, continuing to be visible, and to share with employees at every level that there are other ways to lean into conflict that can be more constructive and more positive, and that you don't give up anything by trying that. The place that we found for the center, the really big need that we fit, is if you think of an organization as having sort of 3 buckets of conflict. There are the normal routine conflicts that people work out, or supervisors work out, or a union delegate works out. People let them go. And then there are serious conflicts that require those formal processes, discipline, grievance, formal EEO investigations. But there's this big middle bucket of conflict where people get stuck and they get tunnel vision, as we all do in conflict, get positional, and everyone knows this is happening and that they're stuck and it's impacting the larger work unit. And we fill that space before the conflict is escalated. If we can help agencies, and now we have ADR coordinators in every agency to be eyes in the workplace, we can identify conflicts where people are stuck. It's not going away. It's having an impact before it's escalated and require formal processes. We can be of service in all of the different ways that we offer conflict services. So that's why we've really grown, and why there's been a terrific response, and why we ended up in an executive order naming our office as a central resource for conflict resolution, thinking about how to extend this into the community. But the challenge is to get people not to default to those formal rights-based work processes.
This podcast is supported by our CUC Connect members, whose yearly membership includes free attendance to our live monthly webinars, 12 additional featured recordings of past training events, and support from our network of certified trainers for continued professional development. Consider joining CUC Connect today and dive deeper into the understanding-based model. Sethu, are you able to talk a little bit more about how your office has raised awareness of this alternative solution or built some momentum within the communities you serve, especially those facing these rights-based challenges, so that people know it's an option that exists, that it's a potentially a positive way forward, and it doesn't have to be separate from the rights and securities that they're afforded through their work?
Absolutely. I would say initially when we began, it really was all based on relationships. Ray had a lot of extensive city government workplace relationships and kept advocating for alternatives, kept even doing mediation, one or two here and there wherever it was allowed. So it was very informally educating whoever we came across was our initial approach, I would say. And then over time, we became more systematic, reaching out to human resources or labor relations officers within city government agencies. We, the Equal Employment Opportunity Offices really take to what we do also. So we found really great partners in EO in city government because they're an office that it comes across conflicts all the time. And of course, they have to assess and filter and make sure people's rights aren't being trampled upon. But essentially, there are big buckets of conflicts that tend not to get addressed and sent back into the workplace. So we continue to do outreach presentations, just talking about the value of mediation, talking about the needs and relationships, and talking about the models and frameworks we do have. And anywhere we got the opportunity, went and did trainings, presentations, mediations, coaching. Over time, when the executive order was established in 2021, that actually gave us a real opportunity to have a liaison within each city government agency and office. So currently, we have these ADR coordinators who are essentially our liaison partners within each agency and mayoral office. And now what we do is we really build that network. And those liaisons really support them in training, help them understand the breadth of our work and our practices, and through them work on conducting more outreach to leaders within those agencies. And now we're very excited to really invite those ADR coordinators to think through how we can apply these ADR practices and principles, restorative practices and principles into those agencies' public-facing work.
What sort of advice would you have for other either organizations, especially smaller organizations or community centers, or even practitioners who are looking to create these sort of systemic and sustainable changes in their communities?
Yeah, that's a great question. Initially, I would say that as a lot of conflict practitioners know, there's a tendency to just look away from conflict. So my biggest piece of advice is if there's any openness that we ourselves have to conflict and conflict resolution, then to not forget the tremendous, tremendous value of normalizing conflict. It's an undeniable reality in any of our workplace relationships, any relationships in any context. And so I can't say enough about the value of normalizing conflict as a real experience and using that as a starting point for really thinking through whether it's collaborative thinking or actual process resolution. I would say there's also something that we do that is so simple, whether it's in a consultation or a coaching or a mediation, it's really giving people the space to be heard in very simple ways. And that, when it's a workplace mediation or coaching, ends up resulting in so many natural creative ideas that people themselves have for the problems they face. So my advice is really, making room for conflict to be normal and then giving space for people to truly be heard. And we find that when we work with leaders in that way, leaders that then pick themselves up and find a kind of alignment between who they are and the values that they hold and then the actions that come as a result. And so I would say there's nothing bigger than creating that simple space of listening and supporting.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Judge Kramer and Sethu, for being here today. It's been a wonderful conversation. I wish we had more time. There's so much more we could talk about.
Thank you, James. Appreciate it.
Judge Raymond Kramer and Sethu Nair are leaders at the Center for Creative Conflict Resolution at Oath, where they focus on community impact and innovative conflict resolution practices to serve New York City. And if I may say, it sounds like they are leading the nation in bringing this important work to city government and the diverse communities that they serve in New York City. A really admirable job and a gargantuan effort being led by a small group of dedicated individuals. You can learn more about the Center for Creative Conflict Resolution and its work by visiting www.nyc.gov/oath, OATH. Thank you to today's guest for being with us today, and to our CUC Connect members whose support enables the Center for Understanding in Conflict to bring new perspectives in the field of conflict resolution and mediation to you, our listener, in each new episode. You can find out more about today's episode, along with full interviews and additional information about conflict resolution and mediation using the Understanding-based model at www.understandinginconflict.org.